I'm sure I've covered this before, but it's about peer review. There's basically when you approach the question of knowledge, theists like to treat things as if theists take faith and divine revelation very seriously, and when you're having a conversation with Christians, it often comes down to them saying, well, this is just my faith and you can't argue with it, you can't challenge it, it's just something I personally believe. And generally when the conversation comes to that point, it's sort of a lost cause. It's like, okay, yeah, I admit that you believe what you believe, and absolutely nothing can change your mind because you don't care about figuring things out what they're like in reality. The reason that science works as well as it does, as far as deciding things which are true and coming up with reliable ways to leverage the things that we know into making cool technologies, is because it's based on a principle of repeatability. We don't go for the idea that there's my truth and there's your truth and you can believe whatever you want to believe, because we believe that there's an actual real world out there where stuff happens that we can find out for real. I mean, our knowledge should comport more or less to that reality. And just feeling very strongly that the Christian God exists and Jesus died for your sins, or that the Muslim Allah exists, or that there's some kind of universal life force, doesn't really cut it in sort of a postmodern way.
Or at a minimum, even if it's not necessarily belief that there is an external world where there are we are forced, as a matter of practicality, to deal with the world that we experience.
Exactly.
And seem to have a shared experience of, irrespective of whether or not it's the ultimate reality. Just so that we don't get us all just calling in to say...
Yeah, which we do from time to time. And, you're right, that even if we discovered that we were living in the Matrix, it would still be worthwhile to figure out what the rules of the Matrix are, because everybody sort of seems to experience this shared reality of some sort, and figuring out whether it's consistent and has rules that we can figure out is important either way, right? So science has this thing that we call peer review, which is basically that if you think that you've got a brilliant new idea, you submit it to a peer-reviewed journal. So everybody talks about often Einstein overturning some of Newton's laws of motion. But when he came up with these ideas, when he came up with relativity and quantum mechanics, which he didn't really accept himself even to the day he died, Einstein proposed these ideas through sort of official channels by publishing in German physics peer-reviewed journals. And the effect that this peer review has is that other scientists can review it and they can copy the procedures that he claims to have used, and they can see if they get the same results. So while we never know for sure whether one person's personal faith, whatever's going on inside his head, is an accurate picture of the world, and the answer to that, to Ken Ham's famous question, were you there, is generally not true, because I'm not sitting in the lab with the scientist doing the experiment. What the peer-reviewed paper does is it lays out the methods that the guy used, and then you can check them out and publish your own paper saying, yeah, I've just confirmed that I got the same thing this guy got, or no, this guy was full of crap, because I did exactly the same things he said he did, and that thing didn't happen. A few weeks ago, Matt got a call from a guy who was into breatharianism. You remember that guy?
And it took me back, too, because when I was writing stuff for Useless Knowledge back then, there was a guy on there who was constantly writing things about how he was advocating for this position that he didn't have to eat. He was getting his energy from the sun and breathing.
Right. And in that case, the were you there question actually seems kind of relevant, because all you've got to go on is this guy's word for it that he never touched a drink or any food for his entire life, and that's not really provable. And this guy wound up emailing us a whole bunch of times, and I got in some discussions, which I posted on the blog a little while back, where I was discussing, how can you prove this fact to me, and could you maybe win the Amazing Randy's $1 Million Challenge and stuff like that. And he said, you should go read this website. And he pointed me to a website which looked like, typical horrible marketing jargon to me. And I was like, this website looks like some guy who's trying to sell you shit. And he said, that's ridiculous. We Hindus are above petty capitalism. And so I searched around, found that sure enough, this guy offers classes for $8,000 and cruises for $15,000, something like that. That's about the order of magnitude. And like I said, I didn't go double check this for prep work, but you can look it up. It's thousands of dollars for the stuff he offered. And I said, look, I really need something like a peer-reviewed paper. And this breatharian guy pointed me indeed to a paper that appeared in a journal, an obscure Indian journal, which brings me to another point about peer review, which is that peer review is actually kind of a minimum requirement for checking out claims. If nothing's ever appeared about your subject in a peer-reviewed journal at all, then you can be pretty sure that nobody's looked into it very effectively. But when something does show up in a peer-reviewed journal, you've cleared the first hurdle. But you haven't actually demonstrated the claim, because the point of appearing in a peer-reviewed journal, like I said before, is so that other people can check out your work and replicate it. And as far as I was able to tell, this had never happened. And also, a lot of people told me, although I don't want to dismiss it out of hand, but a lot of people told me that this was not a particularly reputable paper. And the guy who was running the study and said, oh yeah, we watched this guy for days and he never he never ate anything, happened to be a proponent of this particular inedia thing. Also, there was I think the Indian Rationalist Society did a discussion of this, where they said, somebody really needs to take this guy and do something a lot more rigorous. They said they mentioned this was published in 2010. Mataji Prahalajani, who's supposed to have lived without food or water for 65 years, may have managed to convince a few of this feat, but rationalists are dead against believing it. The Gujarat Mumbai Rationalist Association has said that Johnny's claims have never been proven, and no reports of his medical tests have been made public so far. So they did this study, they published this paper, but they wouldn't release this, and basically they didn't offer the methodology by which other people could replicate it. Which brings me to this point that knowledge is always tentative, and the point of bringing scientific rigor in it isn't so that you can have more guys who you can make an argument from authority to. It's not so that they can convince individual people. It's so that the method of testing can become so well known and widespread that it could ultimately overturn what turns out to be a pretty important scientific principle, which is generally scientists think that if you stop eating stuff, you die.
It's one of the reasons why the James Randi Educational Foundation, in their $1 million prize and stuff, won't test some claims like this.
Right.
The guy who says, I can jump off of the Empire State Building and float down with, I can be naked without assistance and float down. Yes, that's an extraordinary claim that it would be very interesting to test and demonstrate that it were actually true. But if you can't devise a test protocol that has the safety features in there, to ensure that the person isn't just going to die for their potentially misguided belief, then you don't do the test. And so the people who say, I can go for years without eating, well, first of all, it's kind of impractical to test that. But it could be done.
Right.
It's just that what you would most likely end up with is somebody who dies.
Yeah, and that's not very good publicity for the Randi Foundation.
And so what you would need to do is, before you get to the point where you can test that, you need to demonstrate that there's good reason to think that the claim could be true, is likely true.
Because science is built up bit by bit on a whole bunch of different evidence corroborating it. And one of the mistakes that creationists always make is that they look for magic bullets. They're like, if we could find this one thing that overturns evolution, then scientists would slap their foreheads and say, oh my God, we've been totally wrong all this time. And it's like, no, you would still have to come up with a framework to explain how your new theory, whatever it is, explains all of the cross-correlation that we have between like geology and paleontology and the age of the Earth being established through astronomy, looking at redshift and stuff like that. Young Earthism is particularly bad because even most creationists are ashamed to try to go against the vast mountain of scientific evidence that shows that the universe is billions of years old, not thousands. I guess that's it.
Okay. Yeah, we're, I've done some talks about the difference between, or the important things about testability and falsifiability, and the fact that when, for example, the James Randi Educational Foundation tests quote-unquote paranormal claims,
right.
what they're testing is not so much the claim of what an individual can do or the phenomenon is paranormal in the sense that it is extraordinary and it is a departure from what we understand about reality. And the only thing that they can ever do is demonstrate that the phenomenon has actually occurred. They cannot verify a supernatural causation for it. That's beyond the veil of what science can investigate.
Sure. And also, the example you mentioned earlier of jumping off the Empire State Building and living, I'm sure that, like, let's say if David Copperfield was given enough time and a lot of leeway, he could figure out how to appear to jump off the Empire State Building without dying. And that's why, and that's another reason why this incredibly specific claim of jumping off the Empire State Building can't be the kind of thing they test, because apart from the fact that it could potentially kill the guy, it's like, well, it's got to occur under these very narrow conditions, right, where we can observe and set up every aspect to test just only exactly the thing that you're claiming is the supernatural element. And so you don't have to jump all the way off the Empire State Building, but if you can maybe levitate a pen that we provide you to show that there's some kind of anti-gravity going on, that would be more convincing.
Yeah, when we start talking about test protocols, they're designed specifically to look for the things that we would identify as, what's that word? Oh yeah, cheating, which is one of the reasons why there are so many magicians involved in the skeptic movement, because they are experts in making people think that something happened that didn't.
Right, exactly.
So finding testable claims is often difficult, and I think some of the things that are portrayed as testable claims aren't actually, or we're not testing what people are saying we're testing. But we can get to that another time.